With the release of Gamemaker 6 back in 2004 came new possibilities, and chief amongst those was the ability to make 3D games. Nowadays, with editors like Unity and Unreal, you can put together a 3D scene in mere moments, and it can look fantastic thanks to a bunch of built-in functions. But back in the mid-2000s, things were quite different. We had to basically do everything ourselves, and thus, the lowest quality, most basic 3D games were considered groundbreaking in the Gamemaker community, even when the gameplay was really quite shallow. The low quality of the games is no surprise really. Instead of directly editing 3D models and scenes, we had to make models out of vertices and primitive shapes. Here's how I made a model tent back in the day. Yep, that's a list of coordinates I defined by hand to make a tent from a bunch of triangles. There was no 3D editor either, you had to make your levels in 2D, and then after all that effort, your game looked like this. Actually, it didn't look like this. These games are so old I'm struggling to get them to run, so the textures are all corrupted. But trust me, it didn't really look too much better. A few games did stand out amongst the crowd. Park Racer, in my opinion, is visually very impressive. Maybe you had to be there at the time to understand, but this game looks beyond anything I could have ever believed at the time it was created. On the downside, the gameplay is incredibly uninteresting, and the game decided not to count my 5th lap and made me go through it twice, thus landing me 8th place. Thanks. Mr. Yuck Gets on the Crazy Bus is also an incredibly impressive game.
Crazy bus, riding on a crazy bus, riding up, riding down, driven by a...
Some of these games don't even work anymore thanks to changes in hardware and operating systems over the past 20 years. So although Crime Life was highly acclaimed at the time, I have no way of playing it now. In spite of all these limitations, one day, one man released a game that would change everything. It didn't look very impressive, it was kind of stupid, sometimes confusing, but this was the one that stood out from the crowd. Out of all those groundbreaking 3D Gamemaker games, this is the one that a lot of people still fondly look back on. I'm of course talking about Nintendo Nightmare. Although it's perhaps not so well known now, Nintendo Nightmare made its mark because it features Mario swearing a lot, cartoon violence, varied gameplay and just a little bit of gracious plagiarism. It may not look like anything particularly impressive, in fact it looks positively bad, but given the limitations of Gamemaker discussed, this game is huge and complex, and it gives us a great insight into what the indie game scene was like at the time. The man behind this game is Adrian Dietrich, or Supmaster04 as he was known at the time, and he's still making games today. In fact, Adrian and I made a game called Tennis Tower together. It features Ball Dude and some tennis balls. Nintendo Nightmare starts out with an iconic intro. Mario says, "What the crap?" and then the game calls me an asshole. It's a very promising start. The pipe from Mario becomes a minor character and calls Mario a fat ass. There's also a boss fight in which we simply just die. And there's this distant off-screen sign which I think is impossible to reach. Then shortly after, we meet Luigi. I should mention there's 2 versions of this game we can pick to play. There's the original and the HD remake. They're both wonderfully buggy. In the HD remake, Mario never stops walking, and walks through Luigi, then through a wall, and off the edge of the level, never to be seen again. Anyway, in this game Luigi is this block character, which was quite a popular stylistic choice for these 3D Gamemaker games, given that you can only make things from primitive shapes such as cubes and spheres. Luigi fills us in on some backstory. Bill Gates has sent viruses to Nintendo, which causes the games to get messed up. Also, Bowser is dead. So it's up to Mario to gather forces from various Nintendo games and whatever. Honestly, after this point, I have no idea what I'm doing. If I touch this black void, I go to this glitch area and spend about 5 hours climbing these pipes as the camera aggressively tries to make sure I fail. If I go through this pipe, Professor Elvin Gadd from Luigi's Mansion says hi to me, and I can collect these pieces of paper. Either this game is confusing to navigate, or I have a really short attention span, because I repeatedly enter this pipe insisting that I came out the other pipe across the map. Eventually I realised I got the pipes the wrong way around. Well, when I eventually got back on track, I made it to a level. There's a Super Mario 64 style level select giving you a mission to do in the levels, but instead of collecting stars we collect these little bits of paper which represent Nintendo game memory, and we can use these to repair the bugs in the game. Anyway, the game turns into a first-person shooter now, and we have to get the pink bombs from Bob-omb Battlefield on our side. And the game calls me a Dumbo. Also, let's not forget to mention this car. Why is this car here? Why does it control so badly? I don't know, but it's kind of fun. And speaking of cars, in the second level, we immediately get run over by a car. We then get treated to some great visuals, where the camera gradually zooms in on this wood texture. Then Mario gets taken to court for killing a shroob. Remember, the giant shroob who launched us into the stratosphere early on in the game? Getting hit by a car and ending up in court all happens in the space of about 1 minute, completely out of nowhere. The court scene is basically one long cutscene with some choices to make, and if you pick the wrong choice, Mario dies. Anyway, whilst we're stuck here, we get some time to appreciate the visuals of this game. Look at this empty black void, these crudely textured blocks, these jaunty camera angles. The UI for Mario's lives actually looks like it's pieced together backwards. The title of the game window is Score, followed by how many coins you've collected. These text boxes take such an agonisingly long time to clear, and there's no way to skip them. This game features quite a lot of far-reaching crossovers. The boys from South Park are in this level, and Jigsaw from Saw, obviously. In fact, a lot of this game is really quite random. There's a film set where we run around with Uzis killing everything. As we collect more of these pieces of paper, or Nintendo game memory, this black void decreases in size and we can go around it. Mario then gets eaten by a piranha plant. And then I get stuck between some pipes or something, and now Mario is dead, so we play as Link. Yes, it was really that abrupt. You play as Link for the rest of the game. I'm not actually going to play much more of this game because it's really, really long, with an average playtime over 10 hours. And so far this video has taken me several months, and all that exists is a rambling notepad document and some video clips. But before we leave, let's at least take a little bit of time to listen to some of this midified, distorted music. There's another reason I wanted to talk about this game as well as its wider influence in the Gamemaker community. And that's that Nintendo Nightmare is actually a banned game. Gamejolt is, or at least was, a website where people could host their indie games and people would come along, play their creations and leave feedback. It started out innocently enough, allowing creators to upload their games and players to find fun games to play and write comments about them. But eventually things started to change direction. In January 2022, it was announced that Gamejolt would ban all adult games out of nowhere. This caused rather a lot of controversy. Gamejolt claimed it was because their large audience of 13 to 16-year-old gamers didn't want adult content on Gamejolt. Not that it really matters, because everyone knows that itch.io is now the superior indie game website, especially if you want to play some really weird adult games. Anyway, prior to all this drama, Gamejolt were involved in a mass takedown of fangames featuring Nintendo characters and franchises. I don't blame them really, because nobody would really bother playing Super Mario 64 anymore if they had the option to play the superior Nintendo Nightmare. This wasn't really Gamejolt's fault though, since it was Nintendo that requested the takedown. In total, 562 free indie games were taken down. The DMCA takedown involved the removal of games including names such as Mario, Pokemon or Zelda, but with another age-ring classic, Escape from Lavender Town, escaping the purge. So, if you want to make a Nintendo fan game, make sure you don't include Mario, Pokemon or Zelda in the title. But this video isn't really about intellectual property laws, it's just about how Nintendo Nightmare became an illegal game.